Good morning. This is Bronwyn Ailey, Local Food Systems and Small Farms Educator for the University of Illinois Extension. And I'd like to welcome you to the 6th weekly update of the video log I'm calling Local Food Happenings at Dixon Springs Ag Center. Today is Friday, May the 8th, and so this will be the 6th week that I'm bringing you this video update. The first week that I presented a video was on, I believe, April the 3rd, when planted our Determinate Tomato variety trial. And so we're going to look at how our crops have progressed over the last 6 weeks. Everything from cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers, strawberries, and lettuce grown hydroponically to in-ground production of tomatoes and peppers. So with that, we will take you to the other parts of our plots and look at what's going on in our tunnels this week. We'll start off looking at our day-neutral strawberries being grown in the vertical stacks in the hydroponic tunnel. We're using a variety called Monterey, and you can see plants are darkening up from the updates that I've given over the last couple of weeks, and you can still see we're in various stages of fruit production, anywhere from flowering to green fruit to ripe fruit. And something else that these plants are now starting to do that is part of our daily maintenance when we go through and harvest, look for ripe fruit to harvest, is we're also going to be removing runners. And if we look, pan down here, you see this plant, the mother plant is shooting off a runner, and we're just going to go in and pinch that off and remove the runner. We don't want these plants to be putting energy into runner production. We want them to be focusing just on plant production, or I'm sorry, just on fruit production. And so one of the things that, like I said, we'll do daily is, as we're scouting these plants, looking for berries that need to be harvested, we're also going to be popping these runners off as well. I believe our fruit is sizing pretty nicely as well. Get you an idea on fruit size there. And as we turn that over, we still see a little bit of a lightness on this side of the berry, so even though it may initially look like it's ready to harvest, we're going to give that another day or so. Come over and look, and let's see what this one's doing here. This one is really close. Maybe by this afternoon. We may pick that one this afternoon. And this fruit, I believe, would be ready to go. And you can see on this plant, this particular stack, again, we've got our blooming plants. And here's a plant where we've got ripening fruit and green fruit all on the same plant. We do monitor these for thrips as well. You can pull a couple of blossoms out and shake them off into a clear plastic bag, or maybe onto a white styrofoam plate, and shake the flowers and look for tiny little bright orange or yellowish cigar-shaped insects. Those would be the thrips that we want to monitor for. Thrips can be definitely a problem pest in high tunnels. I guess we'll pan over here quickly to another one of our demonstration plots that we have set up. This is a rack system. You can see we've got the hydroponic emitters here. Their plants are in perlite. We have different herbs or edible flowers like the nasturtium here, but we also have things like sage and basil. We've got some dill and parsley and thyme in here as well. So we just like to look at this rail system and see how things grow through the season in this system. As we scan over here to our lettuce table, which if you are following along with the video updates, we got this system up and going last week, so it would have been May the 1st, and you can see the plants have really jumped in this week, especially when we come over here to our rows with the pak choi, both the red and green. Here's a good comparison. This row in the center is spinach, then we have a pak choi row, and then we have a green lettuce. And so you can see the pak choi plants have really jumped quite a bit just in this past week. But again, this is a recirculating system. We have fertilizer in this water, sump pump that pumps the water up through the plumbing here, and again is delivering water down the gutter through the little tubes here. Oops, I'll have to pick the tag up in a minute. And it runs down and drains into the big tube in the back, which drains back into the tank. So this is after a week of growing, this is where our lettuce table is at for this week. And now for our hydroponic cucumbers. I believe last week we had started stringing some of these, and we still had a few plants left to put on strings. And they have really grown in the past week. Currently, there is 1 clip per plant, and I would say we may have another day or 2 left before we need to put that second clip on, depending on the individual plant. Some of them may need a second clip sooner, but they're really growing pretty quickly now. And again, you can see our strings are coming down from rebar, run through the trusses, off of the spools, and clip down to the plants. If we pan over here, we have our Indeterminate Tomatoes, and in this row we actually put 2 plants in each one of these Dutch buckets, and they're each clipped to an individual string. And last week these had not been pruned yet or suckered, and now that you can see the little scars on there where we've gone through and pruned and suckered over the course of this past week. And again, the canopy is opened up a lot more for better airflow, and these also now have 2 clips on them per plant. They're getting pretty tall. It's hard to see. They're now waist high as far as the height on these plants. And if we back up just a little bit, we'll see our hydroponic bell peppers. And we look in the center of that plant, we're starting to see some flower buds in there. And they each have 1 clip on them. They'll be being grown the same way as the tomatoes and the cucumbers. And now as we take a look at our bell peppers in our spacing study, you can see they've definitely jumped this week. They're a lot darker green. And if we look in the center of this plant, you can see we've got our flower buds forming. Let me get out of the sunlight there. This morning here it was cloudy and raining pretty heavy on and off, and now the front has moved through, and if you can hear from the background, the wind has picked up pretty good. and the sun has come out, and so we've gone from a really cloudy, cool morning where we had the tunnel pretty much closed up, sides down most of the way, to now it's warming up really nicely in the tunnel here. We've got this side up most of the way. The other side's down a little bit, trying to block some of the wind that's blowing through here. But here's like I said, here's the bell pepper spacing study this week and what it's looking like so far. And as we pan over here, as we look at our Determinate Tomatoes, this week a second string was put on. Plants have grown enough to need that second string for support, and they're continuing to get a weekly dose of fertilizer through the irrigation system. And you may also be able to hear in the background the irrigation running. Trying to put on a little bit of water in these beds, going into this evening's potential frost situation. Here at our location, we're right on the line. I think they're calling for 34, 35 degrees here. And so we're gonna let the sun really warm up these beds this afternoon and put a little moisture in these beds. That'll hold more of that heat that we're gonna be soaking up the rest of the afternoon. And we'll shut the tunnel down good and tight this evening. And we should hopefully be okay as long as the temperatures don't drop lower than what they're calling for. I think we'll be okay, because at this stage, these tomatoes are big enough, and with our stakes in here, this is going to be pretty tough to hang row cover over or drape over. And so that is our plan for hopefully weathering the potential frost event that's going to happen this evening. And on that far row, our mystery row of not really sure what's happening in that row, those tomatoes really haven't perked up a whole lot. There's a few that are starting to, I think, grab and fill out and green up a little bit, but they're still looking pretty poor. So I think that is about it for the update this week. You can see we did, from the suckering that we did a couple of weeks ago, this is another good example of how open the canopy is. And you can see the strings really helping to support the plant there. In our third tunnel, we still have a couple of planting dates of carrots that are still in the ground. What we're looking at here were carrots that were direct seeded in January. And if you notice, the back half of the tops are definitely a lot fuller, taller, more lush than the front half. The back half had been covered at a couple of really cold events through the winter. We had pulled cover on those individual plots, whereas these front plots did not receive a cover. So there's definitely a noticeable difference in the foliage growth on ones that had been protected from a cold event compared to these front ones. And if we look down here and we dig around, we still see a pretty small carrot forming in there. Hopefully you can see that. Sorry, jiggling the iPad. I'm still here filming by myself, so you can see these carrots are not quite ready. But let's go dig one down here. Look at what the top of some of these further down that had been covered. See if the size looks any different on these, and I'll come to the end. Make sure I'm not in a plot area. if we were to look at this carrot, this top is quite a bit bigger. I'm going to go ahead and pull this. I don't know what it's going to look like under here. It's up next to two other carrots, so I imagine it's probably going to be a distorted looking one. Yep. But you can see the size of the carrot. It's getting pretty close to harvest on this particular plant date. The last planting date that we have was direct seeded in February, and it's up here in the other part of the tunnel. We'll make our way to that. Those are definitely a lot further behind. We may look at harvesting some of these January seeded carrots, especially in the covered plot, possibly next week, and see how their size looks there. And if we look at February plot here, and dig around, and I'm seeing a little bit of a top there, not big enough to want to harvest yet. And then we'll look at this other section. Find a place in here. So we dig. Again, these just haven't quite sized enough, so these will be a few, 2 or 3 more weeks out anyway, 3 or 4. So got a little bit of time on these February seeded carrots yet. So I think that concludes this week's video update on plots and progress of plantings that we have here at Dixon Springs. Thank you guys for joining me this week, and I will be back with you next week. Have a great weekend.